Meanwhile, 22 minutes after the hour, let's bring in Fox News contributor Kellyanne Conway, Jason Chaffetz, as well as Fox and Friends weekend co-host Charlie Hurt. Kellyanne, I'll talk to you. Your sense about the fact that we did really not get any details from that press conference. Why?
Look, I think anybody who's confused about how this went down is still wondering what happened at the end of that final Sopranos episode. This is exactly what President Trump said was going to happen. He said it's not his deal to make. Putin is killing innocent people in a sovereign nation. He invaded that nation, and the country that is being attacked so viciously needs to be at the table to make the final deal. The second thing the president promised and delivered upon, Brian, is that this meeting would set up the framework for the next meeting. And it is not always the case where one meeting leads to another. We've all seen President Trump be one and done. I think in addition to the art of the deal is the art of the details. And I know President Trump is going to get back on Air Force One tonight. He's not going to go to sleep at all the entire ride. We already know that. And he's going to expect everyone around him to be contributing to what the structure and the framework and what the details should be like. And I think he's going to talk to Zelensky again. He's going to talk to the other European leaders again. Look, everything came up Trump in the U.S. today. This was his meeting on U.S. soil with U.S. bombers ahead. Mm-hmm. Look at the step and repeat behind them. It says pursuing peace. Do you think Vladimir Putin wanted to stand in front of a banner on U.S. soil a foot shorter than the U.S. president in front of words that say pursuing peace? That's the goal here. But that's President Trump's goal. And the last thing I'll say is Putin, I disagree completely with who said he's got cards to play. He got the first word, the first statement. I think today the most important word to get was the last word. And President Trump was crisp and concise. You know why? Putin treated him like they're friends. Oh, the religious artifacts. Oh, you're looking so healthy and vibrant. Pfft. Donald Trump was not being his jovial, jaunty self in this press conference. It was not emotional. It was transactional. And I think it's because Putin knows Trump can crush Russia's economy with primary sanctions like he's done before and these secondary sanctions for countries like India and China who are buying Russian oil. I think it's a huge win for peace today and a huge win for our president. Yeah, and
when we get details, I'll know. I can't weigh in until I find out what exactly they agreed on, but they both agreed to something. Jason, let's start with you. Your thoughts about what we know so far. They both came out. I think that's actually a good line that Putin had and why they left. He goes, it's good you have good health and you're alive because of the assassination attempt, right?
No kidding. I think it's a huge win for President Trump, for the United States. There is but one superpower in this world. It's the United States of America, both militarily and economically. You had the visuals on the military side, but both President Putin and President Trump talked about the economic strength. I also don't think this is all about Ukraine. I think they probably had a discussion that was much broader than that. I think this has to do with China. I think it has to do with Israel. I think it has to do with where Vladimir Putin...
You think they talked about all that?
I think they do mention that. I don't think they go 3 hours with focus? Maps. Well, because I think they actually go through and they want to talk about all of these places on where Russia is in the world. And we can push Russia around because if Donald Trump decides to turn that knob and say, you're no longer going to be a participant in the world economy, then you're going to fall apart. That's why President Trump holds all the cards.
And that's why John Radcliffe going, don't you think, Jason? Yes. John Radcliffe going is important
Howard Lutnick.
Because he knows what's going on in Russia. He has the intelligence. So he says, listen, I know what he's telling you, Charlie Hurt. Radcliffe could say, but I'm going to tell you the reality, what's really happening in Russia, and the CIA knows.
Yeah, and I think the big reason we're all kind of reeling right here is because
we know nothing.
Yeah, well, we know nothing, but also we're so accustomed to Donald Trump taking all these questions. The president never misses an opportunity to take questions, and so we're sort of like confused by this. Right now, normally, under normal circumstances, we would be 1/8 of the way through a reeling press conference where he answers every single question. Obviously, this is a different situation, but I also... it was interesting watching him give those remarks. He did it off the cuff. He had no notes. He was responding to what Putin had clearly prepared extensively before he walked out there, read it, word for word off a piece of paper. Trump was talking almost like the wheels were still churning.
I agree.
Like he was still like
evaluating and digesting what just took place.
But it's a reminder that Trump is not afraid of high-stakes gambles. He's always doing these high-stakes gambles, and I think he's still in the process of trying to figure out what he wants and what he can get.
Because his approach to big situations, he gets calm. The more intense it is, the calmer he gets, and that's why he seems to be really churning, not nervous about the ramifications, not worried about the protocol. Before we go back to Kellyanne, there's another portion when they talked about what President Trump was going to do next as he left the stage. Listen.
There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting.
So, Kellyanne, what do you think he's going to say?
Well, first of all, what a difference 6 months makes. I was at the Munich Security Conference in February. I sat with the U.S. delegation when our Vice President, J.D. Vance, gave that unbelievable, stirring speech, and at the collective pearl clutching by all the NATO members and all the European leaders. Oh, my God, what is he saying? What is he doing? It's so rude. And by the way, Ukraine, must be at the table. Excuse me, Europe must be involved. It's President Trump who made sure he called the European leaders, but he reminds them, you guys are in for about $100 billion. U.S. is in for about $350 billion. Last time we all looked at a map, Ukraine is in Europe. So you need President Trump. And I think what he's going to do is call them and keep them apprised of what's happening. And he's got, I think the thing that we're all missing here is the arc of the spectrum of the last 8 years. We've gone from President Trump being Russia collusion, Russian asset, to him literally being the guy to help Russia and Ukraine perhaps broker this peace. Last thing, I'd be very curious to know, we don't know what President Trump thinks of Vladimir Putin. He hadn't seen him in 7 years. Nobody reads a room and reads people like Donald J. Trump. Be very curious. Maybe we'll never know what he thinks of Vladimir Putin. If he looked at him today and thought, this guy's lost a step, he's a little weak. Remember what he said after Assad finally left Syria in disgrace. President Trump's comment was, that's because Vladimir Putin took his eye off the ball in Syria. He's so distracted with this ridiculous war in Ukraine. So he senses weakness there. Look, people thought this Russia-Ukraine, quote, war would be over in 3.5 days, 3.5 weeks, maybe 3.5 months if Ukraine got a little lucky. Guess what? We're 3.5 years plus into it, and Putin has lost all these people as well. Jackie Heinrich said they're kind of paying people to, or somebody said they're paying people to be in the forces now. So he may have detected some weakness there.
Yeah, Kelly, stand by. Just real quick, I just talked to a general in charge of the Ukraine operation from the American perspective, and he said that President Trump does have all the cards. He said that he can demand a ceasefire. Things are bad in Russia. And he also says, look, when Russians negotiate, they try to get details on things that they do want and go out of their way to be vague on things that you want. So we'll see how this all comes out and what the details are, because if the president feels if he's being tapped along, he's going to have a response, and it's probably going to be sanctions, and it's going to be more arms. When we come back, what do new polls say Republicans think about the war in Ukraine? More with our panel and more on the coverage of the historic Trump-Putin summit. We're still efforting to find out what exactly was agreed on and what wasn't. Don't move.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.